Okay, well, good afternoon, and thank you for turning out such great numbers to welcome an esteemed guest here to GESIS today in the form of Professor John Aldrich, who's a professor of political science at Duke University in North Carolina. And he's got so many wonderful honors to his name, I won't recite them all, but he's visiting here GESIS on the invitation of the CSES project. Of course, of which he is the chair of the Module 5 Planning Committee, and thus mine and many people in the room's boss as head of the CSES, the academic head of the CSES. He's here today to talk to us on a very interesting presentation called Institutional Influence of Behavior, Correcting for Selection Effects Using the CSES. So I'll say no more apart from to welcome you and thank you for coming here. GESIS is delighted to have you. The floor is yours.
Dankeschön, guten Abend. Okay, now I'm done with my German, except I can, at the end I know how to say, let's go get beer. So thank you very much. I do appreciate the invitation. Pleasure to be here. Escaping a hurricane to come here, so it was a really good time to come. Went right over the house, so it was. Anyway, so I'm glad to be here. Let me explain a little bit about, this is only some of the co-authors in this project. It's actually a class project that I did working with a graduate research seminar. And that's, these are the three, well, anyway, so those are the three team leaders of units in this. So there's actually like 9 other co-authors. So we can't publish short articles because we can't fit our title and names on there. So that explains a little bit about sort of the structure. What we did as well with the 3 people below are the authors or co-authors of projects that use CSES. They're all from Module 2 data, who have already published papers on using those data, and they're collaborating with us as we sort of apply the selection modeling that we'll be using to with them. And so the idea was, instead of saying, here's our methodological idea, everybody who didn't follow it is stupid and should be, rather work together to improve and get to the best possible product in a positive, collaborative kind of fashion. So that explains why this slide is as big as it is. And actually, the person who did, Josh Lerner over there, yeah, he probably did more work than anybody else on this. But anyway, so we'll start. For those, I assume everybody here knows CSES. Did I say? Of course. Yes. So it's this fantastic project, of course, but of the set of potentially eligible democracies to have a national election study and run the module and get their act together to actually fill out the long form of the macro data. I having been done many times to try to remind me to get the U.S. data in, know that this is the case. Anyway, so there's a lot of reasons why some nations who are potentially eligible don't contribute the data to the CSES project. We're typically more or less around 50% of the potentially applicable nations actually do have an election study, run the CSES module, submit it, and it's in a form that's acceptable and usable within the CSES. Over time, different modules, different percentages, but something on the order of about half the countries do and half the countries don't. So that's number one point. Number two is that, as you may well expect, the assumption that it's completely missing at random is implausible in this case. It's the European nations, the North American nations always participate. New democracies, less developed democracies, are among those who have the most difficulty in getting their act together to be able to do this, or indeed being able to have a national election study at all. And so, so that's point 2. So point 3 then is that the purpose of CSES to be able to make broad comparative statements about the effects of institutional or other social, societal level differences in voting and turnout and other kinds of participation and so forth are at some risk. The inferences you make, unless you do something to take into account that the population over which you're trying to generalize is not the data you have is not a simple random sample of those nations. So that's the problem. A number of people involved with CSES have been talking over the years about doing something about it, and I said, oh, I have 9 or 12 graduate students who are looking for something to do in their research seminar to get a good grade, and I said, one way to get a good grade would be, no. And so we decided to take this on and to try it out, see what would happen. Okay. I believe this is CSES2. Yeah, this is CSES2. These are the countries that have actually participated. Certainly, as a random sample of the world population, you can see that they're not. Africa's rather unrepresented southern Asia and so forth. That's of course not necessarily the same thing as democracies, but in fact, as you sort of look through Latin America and Central America, I can't tell, the Caribbean is relatively underrepresented too, that in fact democracies are also asymmetrically engaged in things. So that sort of sets up the problem. This is a problem, of course, that's been around, standing problem that's been around for a long time. Jim Heckman, when he was a young faculty member, sort of developed the sort of standard approach to it. And over time it's been worked on. And the selection bias problem generally, in the context that we're looking at, has sort of 2 different ways to think about it. And then we are going to use an exemplar method that draws off each of the 2 sort of conceptual ways of thinking about the problem. Of course, at some level, they're rooted in the same basic problem they're trying to solve, and so there's similarities across these. But I'm going to sort of talk about the 2 different ways of thinking about it. Heckman, when he originally developed this, thought of it as a missing variable problem, an underspecification of the equation, in such that in this case, whatever it is that is the reasons why some nations have participated and some nations have not, is that measure is something that's not included in your regression model, if you think of it as a simple regression model, and so you've left out a relevant variable, and so it's underspecified, and especially given that the participation measure would be correlated with variables of interest, you would expect that your estimates are biased and inconsistent. Like, that's the sort of standard way. And so the Heckman selection method that he proposed himself is essentially to come up with an instrumental variable that you substitute in for that you estimate and put on the right hand side, and thereby try to attenuate the unbiased and inconsistency in the estimates, the bias and inconsistency in the estimates. That's one. The second is that if we think of the countries we have as a sampling from the larger population of all the countries that could have participated, it wouldn't be a problem if it was genuinely a simple random sample of countries. But it's not. And so we need to sort of correct for sampling problems, if you will, think of it in that respect. And it's a little bit like the way we try to deal with internet samples. And you need to reweight the sample so that with the weighting, it looks like it's a random sample from the population. And so the second method is simply a different way of thinking about exactly the same problem, but think of it in this way as come up with a set of weights that would, in this case, put more weight on the newer and less developed democracies and less weight on the more advanced and older democracies, if those are the particular ways they come about. Now, the part we're sliding through, and I'm not going to do much with the technical methodology, although I could do a little bit if you wanted me to. I think I can still do it. I think I'm certainly over jet lagged. I could do it off the top of my head, but probably not. Is that the standard methods have a standard solution, but they assume that it's not you don't have multiple levels of measurement. So we have surveys with respondents at the individual micro level, and we have data at the national level, whether it's parties, party systems, or national characteristics, the government, the structure of the government, electoral system, and those sort of things. And that, of course, adds a wrinkle, and the wrinkle is particularly that we can go out and measure at the macro level, the national level stuff. We can get measures of nations that aren't included, but we don't have any really good way of making, except making up data from surveys that weren't connected in those nations. And so we're going to be trying to correct estimates working at the macro level that should have a consequence at the micro level, but you'd have to sort of really work through to know what you need exactly to get the consistency that you would want out of the estimates. And that's it. How should I say this? An incompletely solved problem at the moment. But as you'll see, so is the estimation that I'm reporting. We're partway through it. And my promise is that for the graduate students in the course that we will finish and hopefully publish papers, or however we end up publishing it, before they're tenured. That's my only hope. So this is, okay. So the procedure that we went through, so we have, roughly 200 countries in the world. Some fraction of them are democracies. Some fraction of those democracies participated in CSES Module 2 in those particular years, 01 to 06, I believe. And the way we define what the missing set of observations is, we took I think we took the polity score for the countries included, saw what the absolute lowest score was, or I guess it's the biggest number score, but in polity, and then they said that defines the baseline, and we're going to compare it to all the nations that have at least that level of polity democracy score from the polity groups or higher, and went out, and this is where it became a class project, went out and gathered as much data about the government, the economy, the society, as we could easily gather that would be potentially replicable across people and years, to provide us with a set of measures that are available for included and excluded countries. That can serve as the raw material for a first equation in which you either estimate the probability that a country participated in CSES or not, or allows you then to provide the estimate for the weighting factor, what you would have to do, sort of 1 minus that would be the 1 minus that probability of participating would be the weight that you would use to make it look like a sample of the full population of countries, that it was sort of essentially a simple random sample, as 1 chance of participating. And there are a number of different ways of thinking about this first equation. If you think about it in the Heckman way, you want to have a theory, in a sense, of participation, right? And so that you can get measures that are plausible measures to use to create an instrumental variable for estimating the probability of participation. So you would want things like the things I've been talking about: age of democracy, the age of the party system, the level of economic development, level of social development, and those sorts of things, and have that as your, sort of not highly rigorous but plausible theory of why these variables and not others. If you sort of think of the weighting as the ways particularly big data people like to think of it, sort of working back, then you want to just cast your net as widely as possible, throw everything into it, and whatever works is the sort of big data sort of way of thinking about it. So those are two very different ways of thinking about the construction of the variables that go into the first equation, therefore what you need to measure and so forth. There's a problem in doing this. That's a trade-off that you face, particularly in this context where we have a bunch of different, we're applying it to a bunch of different applications that have their own theory and their own set of measures that are theoretically relevant to their particular problem at hand. And you'll have in some of these equations, some of the things that you might think is relevant for participation is actually substantively relevant to the theory engaged as well, level of economic development or so forth. And so you need to be sort of careful in the construction of the first equation. I'll sort of point to sort of indications of this. You want it to be able to add some additional explanatory above and beyond the part that should be attributed to, in effect, the theory, which would be, in the Heckman selection case, the second equation that you're trying to correct the estimates of, the original equation trying to correct the estimates of. So this is a sort of trade-off that you face in a practical way in dealing with this. The other thing you would think of, if you're thinking of this as, a problem tailored especially to the specific instance of CSES, you have a lot of users, you also go over a lot of time, and you have different modules, and you might want to be able to come up with a mechanism that would stand well for CSES for the 25 years or so that it's been around. And so it's yet a third kind of constraint in thinking about this. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. I realize, let's see, this one, Yep, okay, so I thought I had different, well, anyway, this doesn't matter. You can sort of see this is GDP, the age of democracy, a bunch of things, and as you can see, almost all of these things are strongly correlated. So that this is a logic regression of 1 is participated, 0 didn't participate. And all you're supposed to see is here's a set of things. It actually goes down a little bit lower than this. There are a few extra variables too when we're doing the weighting, especially. You see a substantial number of these things are really substantially related to the probability of being a participant. That is to say, it's clearly not random. There's a lot of non-randomness to this. A lot of things.
So the N is 150 or something.
So yeah, so well, it's actually for democracies. It's in 2001 to 2006. It's around 88, I think, something like that. But this is yet another thing that you're dealing with a relatively small n in this kind of context, and so there's a serious problem of overfitting, a potential of overfitting. You need to worry about. Not necessarily this equation. It's just, but then it goes when you go to the second equation, you're going to. Anyway, so there's that. This is the inverse probability weighting to get the second method, and so I've already explained the sort of conceptual nature of it. This is one of the things that's getting a lot of attention now in a lot of different ways, and so there. A lot of sort of very specific wrinkles. You need to think about these things for which particular kind of weighting you want to go through when you're talking about individual applications. And so, we hit sort of relative, Koske and Imai and Rakovic, have now proposed this scoring method, and you can just follow the method directly. As sort of the hot news. I think it's about as new a method that's sort of worked out enough to have a couple of papers about it. And so we happen to use that, but that basic idea is going to be the same no matter which specific virtue is it. If you're trying to get the weighting of your sample back to so it looks like it's a random sample, the general population. I'll skip over this. This is the one I fixed up. Oh, there it is. I'm going to skip to this is the weights that are attached to some of the countries. These are the ones from the included countries. I think these are all included countries. As you can see down here, what used to be known as the first world gets kind of densely packed, and you can't even read it. But so this is the probability of having a CSES, and this is the weighting, and so it's a nice smooth sigmoidal shape, and it obviously weights by sort of recency of democracy and/or development and that sort of thing. And low scores on democracy, typically too. That's what that looks like. This was I think the slide I meant to show you before without quite as goofy a set of names on them. And this is so this was one I said. So it turns out that of course the same first equation applies no matter which method you're using. So this is both for creating the instrumental variable for the Heckman selection and for the weighting. So it's just the inverse of the probability, the estimated probability the inverse that's then used to resample. This is showing sort of how different things are. You want to look at sort of the means. The standard error is also, this becomes really important because if you have a small number of countries standing in for, as you do, for the relatively high weighted ones, it's going to really affect the standard errors that you get out of this, and you hope to be able to recreate it. So this is before balancing, and there's pretty substantial differences in say the means across many of these, not all of them, obviously, but some of them have really age of democracy is quite a bit different. Upon resampling, it still doesn't correct the weight back to zero. It narrows so this is sort of the extreme version. That's why I'm pointing to this, the age of democracy. It's still considerably off what you would say is a simple random sampling, and so it suggests there's room for improvement. So the idea would be that we would go back and measure, try to get more measures. more measures is in fact what we're doing now, getting a larger and larger set of things that we can sort of throw into this that will make this, that will make these two means and these standard deviations as well closer together, so that this will have the look of a sample. Okay, so there are 3 applications. I gave a version of this at the most recent APSA meetings, and somebody walked up with basically handed us a data set and said, can we play too? And so we're looking into whether we can work out expanding yet another one. So this has sort of obviously got somebody interested in this. There are sort of 3 different papers, so slightly different things. Given the nature of this, it's less important, I think, for you to understand what the papers already were, but to see that there is, in fact, changes that come through this. So in this one, Pedro has mixed feelings about his agreement to participate. The thing he saw is the sort of variable that was the most consequential in his theoretical explanation which was the presidentialism variable, as our example of how things tended to decline. So here's his presidentialism. It goes down towards. So this is the original. Okay, here it is with the Heckman selection. So it kind of these are different dependent variables, right? So these kind of decline pretty substantially, making him less than happy. But what I wanted to point out here, this is the thing, is this presidentialism stayed more or less as it was supposed to. This is the variable that is the instrumental variable for this. This is where it's significant. This is where it's adding something above and beyond what the theoretical model is explaining, so it's actually correcting. So this is the one equation in which that is true, that the explanatory value didn't get all sort of soaked into it. And here is where that came true. It's also the case where GDP became a significant influence. It was very small. If you go back here, it was very small in the original, and it becomes, substantially larger and significant in the corrected version. Let's just move on to want to go through a couple of the other ones here. I want to go especially to this one that Andre Blay and Singh have. Ooh, this didn't come through very well. So this is an example in which this is the original model. This was the fitting of this. It just put it up over the top. So this is you could expect 2 things to happen as you fit this better. Either things that weren't significant become significant, or the things that were significant or important or substantially large became smaller. So there are cases where it turns out this way. By far, the standard case is that you lose significance. What seems to be, on average, explanatory changes. I want to just go.
Publication bias.
Pardon?
It's all publication bias.
Yes, right. It probably is. One other thing that I wanted to point to, and this is the one in which we have the largest impact on the individual level. Right. So we're correcting at this level, and so these things that are characteristics of the sample, we see things that go away, right? Mostly because of increased standard error in the fit, because you're reweighting things, right, in such a way that your most precision is being weighted down, because it's where the densest pack of your observations are, and where the sparsest data is being weighted up. So these are the trade-offs that you have to face in doing this, and Okay, so that's where we are right now. It is possible to do this. One of the things I wanted to point out about the individual level observations was that correcting at the macro level reveals effects at the micro level. Right? There was some possibility that wouldn't happen, right? It's quite possible. And of course, in individual applications, it might not. The biggest conclusion is that no matter every correction you do, you get different results from the original. That is to say, it does matter that we take into consideration which countries are participating and which aren't in the CSES, and do need to think about the consequences that we'll have for our inferences and provide some kind of a testing to be able to justify the inferences we want to make off CSES data, that the estimates we're reporting have a reasonable level of consistency for us to be able to claim plausibility for our results. And the final thing is that we are working in a world of relatively small n, especially at the nation level. And so as we tinker with this, it's constraining the amount of information we can pull out with respect to our theory from this limited data, even when we have a huge n of individual level observations. So that's the project we're engaged in. Right now we're about halfway through, and so it's at the sort of hardest to present because we think we know what we want to do. We think we have some results, but we have a lot of work to do to sort of pull it back together into a coherent whole. So I'm really looking forward to any comments or suggestions you have before I use the German that I understand is the word for beer. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So we'll take questions, but if you could just say who you are, so John knows who's talking to first. So.
My name is Thomas Gspend. I think John knows me quite well. Two questions. One is, I guess, so Andrew Gellman has this idea of Mr. P of post-stratifying non-random samples to be done online. And I don't know the literature too well, what the relationship is with inverse probability weighting. It seems to me that inverse probability weighting is capitalizing on the propensity score, which is like a norm, a one-dimensional functional thing, and this Mr. P seems to be multidimensional. So my intuition would be that Mr. P would be able to produce a better fit in a way than IPV, but I don't know. That's maybe you want to think about this, whether this could be is another suggestion, or maybe this is just off the hook or whatever. Maybe it doesn't make sense. The other question I have is now weighting is not a panacea, right? Especially if you upweight cases that are essentially not there in the data. Right, it could happen that some combination of a strange fellow who is I don't know, whatever strange case that you have to upweight given our the results we have from the first equation of the Heckman model. By doing this, we might be too far away from actually the data we have, and therefore the inference might be actually worse, or the results we get might be actually worse.
So let me take the first question first, which is that one of the things that the first things we did, we actually did it live and in class just for fun, was essentially a principal components analysis of the macro data set that we collected, and it came out to be a really nice two-dimensional solution. That is, there are two clear and strong dimensions. There's a sort of a political economy and a trade, openness, and a variety of things like that we don't have in this right now, and a sort of social development kind of thing, the infant mortality one, the life expectancy, and those sort of things. It basically meant we wanted to really collect more on this. But anyway, so you can have multidimensional data feeding into your estimate of the weighting. And I think that's not 100% different from, if I remember Mr. P, that it's sort of similar. And so I'm not sure. I actually didn't think about using, how can I not think of using Gelman, of course. It usually makes them available easily to run. Anyway, we may want to do a comparison. But this leads directly into your second question, which is, either way you think about it, that whether it's the sparseness of the data or the reasonableness of the estimate of whether it's a weighting term or the instrumental variable, you're absolutely right that that the degree to which it's sparse. Let me go back to this figure. It's just a standard regression problem. If you're going up here, this little bit is probably well estimated. This same problem, if we had put up the standard errors, and we couldn't read anything but the country names, but are quite wide, and so there's a lot of room. So there are two things you can do. One of them is you could simply do a sensitivity by running it off of estimates that go off of the various range of sort of what seemed like a reasonable level of confidence. The second thing you can do, which is what I would hope to be able to do now, is see where CSES over time, is it always like this? Is it always, are all the modules like this? And should CSES, for example, put more of its resources into trying to encourage particular configurations of nations to participate? We can't make them have national election study, although we may be able to help them get it across the starting line. But we certainly could perhaps do, so we help with that, or we could help perhaps ensuring that if they do have a national election study, that it includes the CSES, which might require some significant amount of money. They may be thinking, we just don't have the stuff we need to do. We've used up all our resources, so if we maybe help them get a little bit bigger resources so they could fit in the module. Things like that may yield a better product for CSES over time.
Other questions?
I'm Charles Popham, Leibniz, very interesting presentation. When you show us your variable predict participation, I'm very interesting that study methodology side, cross-national study project, the European social study, ISSP, they examine to a large degree response rates and all that stuff. How this depends on interviewer payment, sample frames, in a way, the survey environment. And you look very much on the kind of the social demographic environment of the survey. I wondered if you could kind of like do more like more indicators from the survey environment side.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
Sample frames in one country.
Yeah.
If you don't have a bad interpenetration situation, stuff like that.
Right. So that's very, very helpful. Thank you. One of the things we have thought about for improving the estimates, particularly when we get to genuine multi-level models, is that these countries may not have CSES measures, but they may have a survey, a quality enough survey that we can come up with a lot of the demographics and stuff, and we may be able to fill in some of these, even if we don't have the module questions. We may have other kinds of questions. So that's another way of sort of getting at more information that we can feed into this, even without expanding it. Of course, in historical recreation is, we're more limited than if we're doing it currently. Like in the middle of now, the 5th module is just launched. We may want to think about finding surveys from what's likely to be missing. We have probably have a pretty good sense of what countries are likely to participate in, right? And we may try to see if we can find something that we can use to sort of fill in and make this part denser, even without having be able to do the second equation, and that might get around some of the problems of sparseness over here too.
Other questions?
Don't we have data from Russia and Romania in module 1?
This is module 2. So
This is just my module 2.
Yeah. So we do have these are. I think these are the included ones.
Yeah. These are the included ones.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to emphasize that that there's pretty big spaces. Make it a readable figure, so you can get it's actually a 3-dimensional figure.
Yeah, it would be nice to have in this graph the non-included ones.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Different color.
Right.
Further comments or questions? Last chance. Okay, well, thank you very much, John, for coming and being our guest, and thank you all for attending and for a very